Hi, how you doing? I often get really great tips and comments and some questions from viewers to this channel, and I thought that I would share some of those and answer questions and pass along those tips that have been passed along to me. If you're new here, my name is Sharon, and I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. It has just been bitterly cold out there for about the past 10 days, and the wind has been nuts. The wind chill factors are through the roof most days. But on the bright side, and I do mean this literally, we have just finished the darkest 10 or 11 weeks of winter, from mid-November to now the end of January. I'm not sure that we ever get this bitter cold without bright sunshine. And that's certainly the case now. The two always seem to go hand in hand. So it is nice and bright and sunny. And so from the inside looking out, it's really not too bad. It's only bothersome if you have to go outside. Anyways, on to the comments and questions and such. I'm going to start with the video about choosing the best vegetable seeds because we're at that time of year now where we're starting to choose vegetable seeds, or any kind of seeds for that matter. Manshrek9850 said, "Thanks for the reminder to check maturity dates. It's so easy to get carried away with all the varieties in the seed catalogs. We often get late spring and or early frosts or snowstorms here in Okotoks, Alberta. There's enough challenges with growing on the prairies, critters, bugs, and hail and drought. Maturity dates is something that we have some control over." These are very wise words that come from experience, and I couldn't agree more with everything that's being said here. Maturity dates are so important. You could think that, oh, a watermelon is a watermelon, and then you wonder why someone else has great success and yours is a bust. Sometimes we take a chance, and that's fine, as long as you know you're taking a chance, or you're not going to rely on that, whatever the produce is that you're growing. I'm taking a chance on some delicata squash this season coming up. But if we don't get great weather and they don't produce in time to have well-cured squash for storage, I'm going to have only myself to blame for that, and for giving the garden space to something with 100-day maturity, because that's what that delicata, that particular variety that I bought, has. The challenge of growing on the prairies is really tough enough, and I'd like to add in addition to everything that Manshrek said, I'd also like to add in random cold spells in the middle of the growing season that can stall the plants, and then they take a while to recover. Something like that, like a cold spell like that, basically stalls the days to maturity clock, and that's why it's so important to pay attention to that. So just to sum up, just because we have 100 or 110 or possibly even 120-day growing period does not mean that all of those days are going to be ideal conditions for something to grow and mature and give you the most bang for your buck on that plant. In that same video, I mentioned that when I grow corn, I don't grow corn every year, but when I do, I like the Northern Super Sweet variety. And when I grow butternut squash, I like the early butternut hybrid. And I also mentioned a few tomatoes that I like. BH-GR2DS, I'm not sure what that stands for, but I was trying to figure it out actually, commented, "I grow Honey Select corn and some early girl tomatoes every year and have been getting great harvests. I love the early butternut squash as well and have found them better for long-term storage than many others I've tried." So here again, maturity dates matter. And Honey Select corn has a manageable 79-day maturity, and I think Northern Super Sweet is a 67-day maturity. I've never grown early girl tomatoes, which has a 60-day maturity, but I know that they are a cold climate favorite, and I should give them a try because I wouldn't mind an earlier tomato to have early tomato sandwiches just a little bit earlier in the year. The butternut squashes that I harvested last fall, I think there were just somewhere around 2 dozen, I believe. And I have maybe 10 or a dozen left, and they are all storing perfectly well. As I mentioned, I'm planning to grow the delicata squash this year, and this is my fear with them, is that they won't have the time to cure after maturing. I might get, big, nice, mature squash, but they might not have the time to mature to provide good long-term storage capability. Here's one of these great tips in the carrot harvest video. At SunnyBiz4857 commented, I like to use microfiber towels as soaker pads so they can be washed and reused. A bulk pack of yellow microfiber towels at Costco is pretty cheap. So this is where I was talking about the fact that I put in into the plastic bags. When I'm storing the carrots, I put them in plastic bags with a bunch of paper towels, and then you kind of have to change out those paper towels at some point because they get a little bit soaking wet. I thought this was an absolutely genius idea to use those microfiber towels. We're a long time from carrot harvest. This is one of those ideas that needed to be shared with you. We recently bought a box of those washable microfiber towels, or Grab-A-Rag, I think they are, on sale. And I think they work out to about 10 cents each, and they are reusable, washable, all that. And yeah, excellent idea. It was like a light bulb going off for me, honestly. There were a lot of great comments in the perennials for shade video. At IADR said, in a similar area, I'm having very good luck with Astrantia, which is masterwort, in pink and in white. Overwintering seems to be good, and the blossoms are cottagey, romantic, and retro. I'll just say here that I've now got this plant on my list because I'd like to give it a try in my long border. I'm pointing because it's behind me in my backyard, the north border, and it's the long border. It's dappled shade, and it's the one that has been getting more and more shady as the trees on the south side continue to grow. The comment continues, I have also tried this year Tortuga, which is turtlehead, with great success. Just because of its vigor, I expect it will overwinter, but I guess we'll see. I got a dogwood flower, aka bunchberry, which is Cornus canadensis, in the rare pink cultivar, and it was rated Zone 2B by the tag and grew well. I also found and planted a turtlehead just this past summer. It seemed to root in well, so I'm hoping for its survival. I find it really helpful when I'm shopping to keep a list of plants to look for. It's just on my notes app on my phone. And when I'm out plant shopping, then I open up that list and I just sort of refresh my memory as to what I do have on that list. And it's also easy when you come across a plant, you're listening to a video or you see something online or whatever, you see something in someone's yard and you just quickly make a note about that plant. I am also trying to be just a little less impulsive about buying plants that I've not researched or that aren't on, on the list. And I find this helpful to always look at that list first. In that same video, at Sylvie M commented, those dry shade conditions are really tough. Slugs love my Virginia in the dry, deep shade, but don't bother the ones in the part sun dry spots so much. And so I may have mentioned in that video that slugs never bother my Virginia. So it just goes to show that different gardeners have different experiences with the same plant. I have a lot of slug pressure in the yard, especially when we do have some extra rain, but maybe in my yard, I don't know, maybe they just prefer the hosta over the Virginia, because I find the Virginia to be one of the more resilient plants that I grow, in that they don't seem to be bothered by weather or bugs or hail or drought. And they're probably going to always be one of my top tough perennials to grow. They seem to grow equally as well for me in sun, shade, dry, wet. I mean, they look better in ideal conditions for sure. And they can get a little red edged in the sun if they are in the sun, plus they're really dry. But they are a bit of a succulent type of leaf, and they seem to weather just all kinds of conditions very well. And I think they're really, really good for dry shade as well. Anyway, so the point is, it's really beneficial to know your own yard and not to expect the same outcome as the next person. And speaking of slugs, at Lori A. Schaefer commented, shallow bowls of beer will attract slugs by the dozen. I didn't try that this past year or last year, and I did have some slug trouble with the hosta. But I have had several conversations with my sister about this exact thing, and the bowls of beer were extremely helpful for her, and she was able to eradicate, a huge portion of her slug problem. I have also read about making an easy bread dough slurry, just with some flour, yeast, and water in your kitchen, and that is equally as effective as attracting the slugs instead of having to use a bottle of beer. I think that's what I'm going to try next year. I'm watch for them and sort of be on the ready and try that method next year. At Sylvie M went on to comment, I have found Lamium and Creeping Charlie just too aggressive and too hard to dig out. Goutwood should be on the invasive list everywhere. Does it look pretty? Yes, but it's nearly impossible to get rid of. I would not recommend anyone plant it. That's a really valid point. I know a lot of people hate goutweed because of its spread. And in that video, I think I had mentioned that I had seen a beautiful large planting of it as a ground cover beneath a whole bunch of evergreens. I wish I had a photo of how beautiful it had looked. I didn't take a photo at the time. I do think that there is a plant for every space, or maybe instead it's a space for every plant. And some of the more invasive plants can be really useful in really tough spots. In that case, that was actually a very low maintenance planting for a tough spot under evergreen trees. And there was, a fair number of them. Lily of the Valley is quite aggressive too. I don't have any. I think my mom had some. I don't recall that they were very tough to control for her. E. Manshrek 9850 commented, I have Lily of the Valley contained between a lower deck and a gravel path. Every spring I do have to pull out a few at the edge of the gravel, but then that's it for the season. I think it would bloom more if watered, but it has survived a lot of neglect. And at Janet Olson 7053 said, I also grow woodland violet. It may be aggressive for some people. I find it easy to control. And at Lee ZF7LM mentioned, Solomon seal grows like a weed, a meter tall in my zone 6AB garden. So here I just wanted to mention that very frequently grows like a weed doesn't always equate from zone 6 to zone 3. Our soil warms a lot later, our growing seasons are shorter, and plant roots have to survive those long, deep freezes. So zone 3, cold zoners, if you're reading or listening to information about perennials, always put some context behind that and finding out where the information is coming from. It's not always the same. In the February seed sowing video, I sowed onions, Dusty Miller, spearmint, and black pearl ornamental peppers. And at Billy Stewart 4242 asked, where are you seeding and growing your seeds? Is this a basement or garage or greenhouse? My grow room is in the basement. It's a small room that wasn't being used for anything in particular. There is a video way back in 2024 all about my grow room, and this past summer Andy spruced it up a little for me, but it does remain strictly utilitarian, and there is really only room in there for me. But here in this room, I've added metal shelving and lights. I plan to add more. And so I have expanded a little. You know, my thought is there's probably 5 months at least of indoor growing where I'm not growing outdoors. And I do like to save plants over winter, and I do like to grow things and try things. And this year I'm trying tomatoes, and there's dill growing over there. I harvested a bunch of dill last night, and I have some plans of starting some collards. I was thinking the other day, oh, I think I'll maybe try growing collards in the winter next year. And I thought, well, why wait, you know? So I think I'm going to seed some of those just in a little bit, probably, just to try growing them as well. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is I am in the basement, and this is where I do my winter growing. Also in that video, at Paulette Martin 2876 asked where I purchase my soil. I use ProMix HP, which is high porosity, and I use that for pretty much everything. So I buy the big bales. You can find those generally at Rona in the winter. They usually still have a supply, at least at the Rona I go to. I have often seen it in the winter. The other places like Home Depot and Canadian Tire, places like that, they also carry it. But for those places, I have noticed that it tends to be more of a seasonal item, and you may not be able to get it like right now. But pretty soon, all those places, all the hardware stores and such will have that out. But yes, I like ProMix HP. That's my go-to. Okay, moving on to the Growing Vegetables Ideas and Tips for Cold Zones video. At Whispering Pines 2469 commented, after always growing a great garden on an old cattle pasture, I've moved to town and have to adapt to growing in sand. I've slowly been building up the soil and am having some success. Zone 3 is such a jigsaw puzzle with dates of late and early frosts, soil temperatures, which is why I'm enjoying your videos. I may get a better handle on my growing in town thanks to all of your excellent tips and tricks. Thank you very much. And for sure, we often move across town or a few miles away, and we have to deal with different soils or microclimates or frost pockets, and we need to find solutions. You know, my mom and dad used to live just next door to me, and one night or early morning we had a frost, and my garden froze, and just a few feet over, my dad's didn't. So, you know, you really have to know your own garden. Sometimes it's not about the right seeds because there's so many other challenges. Who said gardening was easy? In that same video, at SunnyBiz4857 asked, can romaine lettuce be grown to full size by direct seeding? And so I usually put out transplants for lettuce, but the answer to that is yes, it sure can. You don't have to wait for the last frost date to seed lettuce because lettuce will germinate when the soil temperature is like 10°C. They germinate in cool soil temperature. As a matter of fact, if the soil temperature is too warm, lettuce won't germinate. I think that it might be somewhere around 25°C. Now that's soil temperature, which is different than air temperature. You all know I like to take my soil temperature and talk about it incessantly, so we'll just move on from that. At Carolyn9547 asked, what did you use for the row cover supports? Is that rebar too? And I think I've been asked this a number of times in various videos, what the row cover supports are made of. They're made of PEX plumbing pipe. You can buy the big rolls of it, and it's easy to cut to the length that you need. There are different diameters of that PEX plumbing pipe. We started with the narrower 1/2 inch, but we've since moved on to the bigger 3/4 inch. The problem with the 1/2 inch is it gets soft when it's hot out, and then it kind of, you know, flops about. And so the 3/4 inch actually has thicker walls. It's not just the diameter that's bigger, but it's stronger pipe, so it doesn't get soft like that in the heat. The bigger diameter also fits over rebar stakes, which I've been finding much easier to manage actually than the supports. that we nailed to the sides of the raised beds. I think that going forward, I will probably be utilizing the rebar stakes more so than those supports that we nailed on. In the Perennials for Full Sun video, a couple of questions were about peonies. At Helen M5M asked, what part of the yard would you plant peonies? The answer to that is full sun for sure, which is always 6 hours or more of direct sun for the best bloom. I have 9 spaced out through the long back border, and that's again the border that is becoming more and more shaded from the willow trees that are on the south side of that border. They're still getting enough sun for them to bloom, but in no way are they getting the massive blooms or the amount of bloom that they used to. But you know, I planted 6 of those 25 years ago and the other 3 at least 15 years ago, and they are huge, huge root balls that I don't want to tackle. And so I'm not going to move them to a sunnier spot. But if you're planting, definitely plant in an area that is sunny and is going to stay sunny. The other question is from at Jeru Wangerig 3092, who asked what kind of fertilizer I use for the peonies. They look very healthy. And the answer to that is nothing. I don't fertilize the peonies. They are beautiful, healthy plants, but I don't give them anything extra. They get whatever they need from the soil. As I've mentioned, they are massive root balls, and the soil that's under there is actually a clay base, and they are well into that now, because they don't just spread wide. They go very, very deep. I've mentioned that I do a lot of chop and drop when I deadhead or when I cut back. Anything that is not too big, I do that chop and drop. So there is always decaying matter on the garden beds, and that decaying matter attracts worms and such. Also, every fall without fail, we cut down and remove the peony foliage, which helps to prevent the spread of any disease or fungus that may be starting up. This method of taking down the peony foliage every year right after frost and removing it that has never failed me. In the video where I take geranium cuttings, at BHGR2DS said, at what temperature do you grow your established geranium cuttings? I usually wait until March to take my cuttings because my grow room in the basement is very warm, around 69 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and so they grow very quickly. I'm always concerned about running out of space in case of a prolonged cold spring. I never set them on a heat mat, but I will try that for quicker rooting. I didn't know they would root without rooting hormone. Thanks for that info. I've tried rooting them in water but didn't have success. Do you recall the name of your geraniums? They're absolutely gorgeous. I know which one that person is talking about, and I'm pretty sure it's this one. It may look a little redder in the photo than it is. It's kind of a beautiful pink on the outside, and then it deepens to a deep pink to almost red on the inside. Gorgeous. It's definitely turned out to be one of my favorite geraniums I have, and I want to take cuttings of it very soon. It's starting to look a little bit ragged, but I'll tell you, it's just, even still, like, it's just pushing out the blooms like crazy. So I never knew the name of that particular geranium because it came kind of like as a one-off in a pack of 6. And I don't know. Actually, none of them were named. 5 of them, I thought I was buying 6 of all the same color, and 5 of them were that color, but then there was this one. So I just consider myself lucky. I did think it was perhaps one of those, is it interspecific hybrids? And I do think it is an interspecific hybrid, but the name of it will forever be a no ID. So anyways, this is a very valid point about running out of room because plants grow faster than we think, and warm rooms can cause fast and sometimes weak growth. Our basement always used to stay around 16 degrees C, which is about 60 Fahrenheit, but You know, a few months ago we got a new high efficiency furnace, and that has somehow changed the basement. So it's often now more like 18 to 19 degrees C, or about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not a lot, but you know, believe it or not, I have noticed a difference in the plants. Because it's warmer, they're continuing to put on growth. They're not really kept in a dormant state. Because they're putting on growth, they're using the water that I'm giving them a lot more readily. I mean, I'm having to water them more often than I did in previous years. As for the rooting hormone, I don't think I've ever used it with geraniums, but I do have rooting hormone, so I think maybe I should try. Perhaps I'll do that with these cuttings if there's a difference, to see the difference if they root any faster. I have always just rooted geranium cuttings on a heat mat, and they do seem to, you know, it's not fast. It probably takes 3 weeks for rooting to happen, but they do root just like that. I've never tried rooting them in water. In the video where I potted up the onion seedlings, @Drills on Canvas asked, how much water and when do you water them at this stage? So this is where I took the little onion seedlings that were growing all together in one cell, and I separated them and I transplanted them into cell packs. In that video, I used jumbo 6 cells, and I planted 5 onions into each 6 cell. And that was because of space and where I had to put them for lighting. So my answer to that was to allow the soil to dry down a bit before watering again. I suggested weighing the potted onions when fully saturated, or when they're good and, you know, fully watered, and then to let them dry down till they were perhaps about half the weight, and then to water again, utilizing bottom watering to encourage deep roots. Then @Rhonda Trumier 5530 asked, where did you get those jumbo 6 cells? And I didn't buy them. Whenever I buy plants in those jumbo 6 cells, I save them because I do find them super useful. Here's another one of those great tips that has been passed along. I have had the same question several times about the green tray that I use whenever I'm doing anything with soil, potting up or seeding or whatever. It's called a tidy tray, and it's made by Garland, and it has proven difficult to get, and it's more expensive than you think it should be. Or at least I thought that. But in the April Grow Room update video, @SunnyBiz4857 said, for potting tubs, I use the cement mixing tubs available at Home Depot, a bit longer than yours and maybe a bit deeper. Curved ends for scooping soil in pots and scraping with plastic pastry scrapers. I think it's ideal. Genius idea. It's affordable, it's durable, and it serves exactly the same purpose. In that video, I commented about poking holes into the bottom of solo cups, and @KatieRZ9DP said, I use an electric drill to make drain holes in my solo cups. You can do a few at the same time, just stack them, easy peasy. And then in a recent video about the new cell packs that I ordered and that I needed to poke holes in the bottom of the trays, and I mentioned I should go find a drill, but @Drills on Canvas commented, I heat up the end of a nail on a candle flame and push melt through the plastic for a perfect hole, and then went on to say that you can use the flat end of the nail for slightly bigger holes. I mean, great tips. In the spring perennial bed cleanup video, @Leanne Fulber 2138 asked, is there a reason you leave the lily stalks on? Winter protection, or is it just so you know where they are? Is it okay to cut off the stems before winter? And yes, I often do leave the stems of Asiatics and Martigons and Orientals in some areas just so I know where they are. I'll tell you, in the spring, I have dug up more than one lily by accident. I also, though, leave them on simply because they're easier to remove in the spring. You can remove them without cutting. They just pull up off the bulb very easily in the spring. You can often do it, as a matter of fact, just by raking. They'll come off. But you certainly can cut them down in the fall as long as the stems have dried right down. They're just kind of brown sticks. It's okay to remove them in the fall. You don't want to remove them while they're still green because the dying down of that foliage will feed the bulb for next year's growth. Also in that video, at Wendy Cooper 1061 asked, what are you using for mulch? And this has been a frequent question as well. I use straw for mulch, and now specifically I like to use flax straw for mulch in the perennial beds. The flax straw doesn't decompose near as quick as any of the cereal straws like oats and wheat and barley. Those will decompose fairly quickly, probably over a couple, maybe you get 3 years out of it, but it decomposes fairly quickly. But I do like to use that softer cereal straw mulch in the vegetable beds. I've never had any trouble with any of the straws. I've never had any trouble with mice, and I don't usually get a lot of grain germination, you know, from whatever that straw was. I generally don't have that too much. I have actually hoped for flax to germinate because it's a pretty flower, but I've never had that either. But I've also been caught with a load of weedy straw, and I think, you know, I'm pretty sure that's how I introduced Canada thistle into the yard. And so, you know, there is that to consider as well. And, you know, in the spring, when the snow melts, my backyard perennial beds that are covered with straw are also going to have tons of leaves mixed in with the straw, and I leave them to decompose. The next video was from April. I had plants in the greenhouse. I was hardening off and also planting some of the cool season vegetables. And at Layla the Pity Mix said, I heard some geraniums won't grow from cuttings. Have you found this as well? My reply was that I hadn't found that to be the case, although at that point I had not tried taking cuttings from Regal or Martha Washington geraniums, nor from ivy leaf geraniums. I have since successfully rooted cuttings from both the Regal geraniums as well as the ivy leaf geraniums without issue, although I find the ivy leaf possibly a little bit more challenging than the rest of them, but they do root. And then at Selena asked about fertilizing the cuttings and how I treat the mother plants after taking the cuttings. So once the cuttings have rooted and they're putting on growth, I start to fertilize them at that point. And then the mother plants, and those are the plants that I take the cuttings from, they get fertilized as usual to help them push out new growth. I use Miracle-Gro 24/8/16 for the vegetative growth, that's the green growth, and then I switch to 15/30/15 for the occasional bloom boost. At Lore 258 said, I'm in a small rural community in Manitoba, so I can appreciate the cold weather you have. Since you've moved your plants to the greenhouse, I'm wondering what temperature you can maintain overnight. Last year at that time, I was able to heat the inside temperature to 10 degrees warmer, or around 10 degrees warmer than the outside temperature. And I use just a small 1500 watt space heater, electric space heater. And last year I had hung a poly curtain at the halfway point of the greenhouse, just so that I could only heat half of it, and that was the space I needed at the time. I didn't need the full greenhouse. As the greenhouse filled with more plants and more soil, there was more thermal mass, and that increased the heat retention a bit. You know, I also think it has perhaps something to do with the soil temperature around the greenhouse too. This year, I'm hoping that the extra efforts we've taken by adding extra insulation in the greenhouse will boost some of that. And this year I've been collecting jugs and things that I can paint black that can hold water, and I'm going to be adding some of those just for a bit more thermal mass. I'm going to give it a try anyway and see if it helps at all. But if you have tomatoes and peppers in your greenhouse, it's really important to maintain a temperature of at least 10 C at night. Your plants may survive lower temperatures than that, but they won't thrive and they won't produce the maximum for you. And as I've said, it can actually stall their growth. At Simarpreet 911 asked, how long do you leave your seedlings outside to harden off, and how do I go about doing that? I like to harden off for about 7 to 10 days. I generally put them in an area that's fairly protected from the wind, and they get dappled shade, a little bit of early morning sun, and then dappled shade and shade for the rest of the day. And it's fairly protected from the wind, but they still get some light breezes there. Over about a week's time, I put them on a wagon, and over about a week's time, I just pull them into the area with more and more sunshine throughout the day. So I gradually move them, and they get more sun and more breeze as the days go on. A north wind there is my problem. If we have a strong north wind, they'll get battered about, and so I generally will move them into the garage, and I leave the garage door open. I've also utilized on unplanted raised beds, I put hoops and row cover and a shade cloth thrown over top of that, and that works very well as well. On those hoops, you can adjust the row cover. You can pull it up a few inches from the bottom so that they're getting breeze through the underneath, or you can pull it up halfway so that they're getting all that nice sunshine from the south side, but they're protected from the north side, or you can play with it that way. It's actually quite a versatile method for hardening off. Or if you have a cold frame, you could do it much the same. You just have to utilize something for shade, especially early on. Hardening off isn't so much about getting them used to cold, which is, I think, what a lot of people think. It's more about wind and sunshine and getting them used to that so they aren't shocked when you do plant them out into full sun. I mean, of course, the cooler nights as well, that's part of it too, but that entire process has to be somewhat gradual, so your plants aren't shocked or you don't get burnt leaves or things of that nature. At Little Garden SK said, my first year growing cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli. Any tips on how to protect them from flea beetles? And at Carolyn9547 in the next video said, I live in southern Alberta and have farmers' fields all around us. I was disturbed to see what I believe is flea beetles the other day. They were on the arugula. Time to screen in the cabbages and Brussels sprouts already. Seems early, doesn't it? There is no option but to use fine mesh cover or row cover on any of the brassicas or any of that cabbage family. And that cabbage family includes cabbage and cauliflower and broccoli and Brussels sprouts, kale, collards, kohlrabi, turnip, rutabaga, bok choy, apparently arugula. And that covering has to be large enough to not only cover everything, but also to be secured at ground level so that the beetles don't have access anywhere. So you just can't drape it over top and think that the flea beetles or the cabbage moth, they're going to get in if there is access somewhere. I have trouble with flea beetles really early in the season. They do overwinter under dead plant material. I have seen them there. And then I get a big influx of them again in the fall after the canola has been cut down in the fields. I live on the edge of town, and so, we're not very far from canola fields. Even my transplants in the cells in the early spring, from the minute I take them outside, I have to be vigilant because they've been attacked in their cells, sitting on my deck. So from the moment they go outside until harvest, they have to be protected in some way. I thought the flea beetles were particularly bad last year in my garden, but using that mesh or a very lightweight row cover, that's also going to protect your plants from the cabbage moth, which also does a ton of damage. Okay, I'll end there for now. I think that's probably enough. I'll do another video at another time about questions and such that came later in the growing season. I absolutely love getting questions and comments and tips from all of you, and so by all means keep them coming. Let me know where you garden, what you're growing, what you're planning, what your particular challenges may be. And yeah, let's talk some gardening. Thanks very much for hanging out today, having this little garden chat. I hope you found it helpful or informative or enjoyable in some way. And if you did, give me a thumbs up, tell your friends, and hit that subscribe button. I hope you're doing well. See you soon.